I want to transition to like courtship and dating.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great,
Okay.
Mike.
Because I think I want you to describe kind of like your vision for that, and especially just the difference with the West. Because I know I've heard you say before, like dating the way we do it is like kind of unique to the West, and it's not common, especially in the East. So fill us in on that.
Okay, so first of all, it pays us to know how dating itself began. So, dating as a practice began at the turn of the Industrial Revolution when women started to live in dormitories and apartments in the big cities so that they could work as factory workers or, later on secretaries in offices and, like ways that women started to occupy the workplace. Um, so, a journalist named George Ade, ADE, actually wrote a column. I forgot the publication, but it's some New York publication. And he was trying to get a woman, try to meet up with a woman, but she reverted back to him and he says, I have no date for you on my calendar. And he started using the term. So now we're dated, like men are now dated by women. So he found that interesting. He wrote an entire like article on this aspect of, well, now like we are dated. So that's where you can see, if you really look between the lines, that's kind of like where there was kind of an inversion happening, because before that, and in all cultures, courtship has literally been the same in all cultures. You had to go claim the woman from her father. Any culture, East or West. That is what it started with. That is evolutionarily correct.
That
right?
makes perfect sense, because here you have the head of the household with his child, and you have another male
Nuclear
coming
family.
to make another family.
Exactly.
So he's going to ask the seniority one, which is the father.
Yes.
May I
The
have
hierarchy
the hand of your
also,
daughter?
we have
It
to-
makes perfect hierarchical sense.
Yes, because that's how males relate to each other. So, just to interject here, so one of my mentors, who is a doctor, a biologist, and a man, father of 5, he's like, "What do you do?" He asked us. We were all women in his class. So let's say you were competing for a position at work, and there was another woman competing with you, and she won the position. What do women do? And we're like, oh, that bitch, like we'll be like combative against this woman, because in our nature, we are competitive against each other. And he's like, do you know what a man would do? And we were like, well, he'd be like, probably avoid him and never do it again. He'd be like, talk bad about him. And like, no, he'd actually take him out for drinks and congratulate
exactly.
him.
Congrats, bro.
And we were
Good
like,
job.
psh, like, what? Whoa. He's like, why is that? Because men have a concept of allyship.
Yeah.
They're like, if he's the big boss now, my job is on the line. My wife is on the line. My children are on the line. So I'd better be on this guy's good side. He places himself under the hierarchy of that figurative alpha. And I thought that was really amazing, because that's what happens at a certain point in courtship when a man goes to her father and says, I'd better impress this dude, because without that, I don't get the woman I love.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
and the
that's
woman's protected
always,
by her father. So
she's protected by her father until the cover goes to the husband to cover her. We forgot dating, put that the other way around, because now you have these women living in dorms in the cities with other women too. Like most women couldn't afford their own apartment, so they would dorm with other women. These other women would also have dates with other gentlemen. And it started to evolve to, like, we're alone. We're not in my father's house. We have these urges, let's say, so we can act on these urges in my apartment. So it's typically a lot of women, and I'm not saying this as a statistic or anything, but like behaviorally, women started to give men and themselves the benefits of what he normally had to earn through her father, through acquiescing aspects of himself to the father and saying, you know what, I will do whatever you ask because I want to marry your
And
daughter.
the father is a filter in that sense
Exactly.
too.
The
yeah.
father and the
Exactly.
uncles
That's
and the
protection.
brothers
Yeah.
and the
Does
whole
this
family
man
unit
align
of
with my
males.
daughter?
Right.
So I have a
So it's-
question based on those, just to kind of extrapolate further on this, because everybody's going to be like, well, there's no romance in that. That's like contractual, and you're eliminating this huge part of romance. And these people, they don't. The people like the man, the girl, whatever. They're not gonna. How do we know they like each other? You got some old guy who's detached, and they're gonna like make that picture as nasty as possible. So my question is here, back in the day when courting was handled, how did those initially those relationships begin? Would they be hanging out in like their little village town or whatever?
I think you're conflating arranged marriage with courtship.
Well,
there's
there's
there's a difference. Yeah, there's a difference. With arranged
I'm not
marriage and
conflating the
courtship.
two of those because there's some cultures where you have arranged marriages and that's like
There are
the way
some,
it is.
yeah.
Right, and they have their version, I'm sure, of courtship. They provide suitors. I mean, even if it's an arranged marriage, they only give them one choice. So that's kind of my question here: is the romantic element, how that begins? Like, are these people in the same villages? Like, what was usually going on?
Okay. So obviously, like, because of technology and the way the world is shaped right now, we've evolved. But traditionally and culturally, courtship was within your locale. In the upper echelons of society, it was to merge two families to be successful as a kind of like a small imperial unit.
Tribal,
Right? So very tribal. So upper echelons would marry into the upper echelon, right? And then lower classes, or what you would call maybe middle to lower class, they would have openness to what you called love marriages. The thing is, love marriages were also happening in upper echelons because in polite society, a woman could spend time with a man alone, provided there was a chaperone nearby.
Right.
So there would be like there are like Queen Victoria, for instance. Hers was a love marriage with King Alfred, right? So that was an example of an upper echelon of society getting married, but in love with each other because they liked each other. They were attracted to each other.
This is so good because I don't want people to get the wrong impression of the old guy forcing his beautiful young girl to marry the warty, nasty frog guy because the frog guy has all this money and he wants that guy's money, and then the poor girl's like this bargaining chip. And that's not the way it was, Like, there's more to the story here.
I think a lot of people conflated with it was all it was, right? But like depending on like the experiences like of that couple, there are. So here's an easy way to look at it. Prior to the dawn of kind of like the love marriage, there was only marriage. Then came the love marriage. So there are distinctions, and we have like Western culture actually to thank for that, right?
The
Because
Catholic Church.
they propagated the idea that there has to be love and attraction within the relationship for this marriage to actually be a meaningful union and not just a
Civil
ideal
thing.
merger, right? Not just a civil union, right? So that was born out of Western society, but that's not to say that that didn't exist in the East, because in the East, so we're talking like from South Asia all the way here to Asia, right? India most predominantly. India, they still have to this day marriage and love marriage. They differentiate that. So love marriages are those that are between two people who were attracted to each other. They formed an emotional bond, and from that emotional bond, they decided to enter into married union. And then you have the arranged marriages, which are typically now, in this day, probably among certain castes of
Like
society.
the higher ones?
Usually higher. Like I was just talking to a
Honor,
client
dignity,
who's
you gotta
Chinese.
be with this person kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I was talking to a client who she was Chinese, and she was saying in their culture, in Chinese culture, that's still done in some in some instances and within some families. So it's still there, but that doesn't make it like evil, like you're marrying
No.
rich
You know what's
frog
interesting
guy.
to point out is like even if you look at like romance, if you look at it from like Romeo and Juliet, typically it was the woman was in the higher status position. Or if you look at like Aladdin, she's a princess, he's a street rat. Okay.
Yes.
And a lot of these, that's where it ends up being like a woman wants, and when that fell apart, and you see it going on now, women are still hypergamous. They still want to be with the guy that's better. But even after they get to have the romance and all that, now they still find themselves oriented into the classist status style of choosing a mate, which I find hilarious because it used to be like that's the way families did it. We're going to
Yeah.
strategically marry our kids off so that we can find ourselves in a better position socially and economically and in our community. And that used to be it. And women used to be like, I want to marry the street rat. But now, since you can marry the street rat, it's like
They
they're
don't wanna marry the
still
street rat.
oriented towards the same biological way that they were in
It's
the
going to
first
be the
place.
same because a
Hilarious.
woman wants to survive. Because so I think what we need to appreciate here is, and of course, this is not to say like gentlemen that you're not worth anything, but males are actually born biologically disposable. Females are born biologically valuable because women carry life. So this is why, it's so hard for women to understand why men were the first ones to be put on the line at war,
Exactly. That's
right?
exactly where my
Because
brain went immediately.
their brains are more adapted to that behavior coming out if they have to defend themselves. It's
Yeah,
harder
And
for
only
women.
like 40% of men, I think, in our past have reproduced.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And usually
So
they're
like
the ones who survived.
the strongest survive. So we are the children of the ancestors of ours who actually survived and procreated. And I
Yeah.
know women don't like to hear that because if you have birth control and all of these things, but I'm like, ladies, this is actually why you're feeling the way you do. This is why you want everything without like all of the things that come with being a woman, right? So
Right.
I want the rich, six-figure, goes to the gym guy, but then he has to be my girlfriend. He has to
Yeah,
like
it's
listen to
craziness.
my problems and be just like my best friend. I'm like, you're not gonna find that in a male man,
It's
a
Beauty and the
fully
Beast.
male-brained, expressed man who can satisfy like what you biologically will eventually catch up with
Yeah,
at a
she
certain
doesn't want that.
age.
She
And
at
then that's the
bottom
same
at
thing
bottom
for
she
guys
at
that
bottom
want
she
this-
does not want that because at the end of the day she can have that and those guys do exist. I'm telling you
They
right now,
do.
they do. And she's gonna be so frustrated with the fact she's not getting what she needs from that guy that she'll find a way to spoil that relationship.